I'm Sir Al Ainslie-Green, the Independent Children's Commissioner for England. There's been a real increase in the numbers of children and young people who have behavioural and emotional difficulties. This programme looks at the approaches taken in 2 schools to help children and young people have greater emotional resilience and to cope with the stresses in their lives. My first visit was to Alison Peacock, who's head teacher of Wroxham School in Hertfordshire, and I asked her, how can we make children mentally resilient?
The way that we work here is we have a culture which is all about listening to children.
Right.
And we also hopefully have a culture where the staff feel they have a really important voice as well. So there's
Yes.
a community where everybody is engaged in the business of teaching and learning.
Right.
And the children are a crucial part of that in terms of the decision making that goes on.
Right.
And also the activities that they engage in.
Right.
And because they're given so many choices, they're also taught how to make informed choices, and that seems to, well, it has created a very happy, vibrant school that's very successful.
The children are listened to, but are they heard?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think the way that we ensure that every child is heard is that we have a system in school which is a whole school democracy through mixed age circle meetings.
Yes.
So every Tuesday, instead of an assembly at 10:15, all of the children up and go to their circle meeting.
Right.
Circle meetings are led by Year 6 children. The staff participate as equal members of the group. And the children all have a shared agenda for the week. So every week we meet, and every week we talk about things that are important to the children that may have been brought up by the children. They may have been brought up by the governors or by the staff or a combination of all those things. And we come to a shared decision about how to
Right.
move forward.
Okay, and can you give me an example of a decision that actually has changed something?
One of the things at the moment is that the children are all engaged in den building. Now that came about because last year I went to the children and said, the weather is incredibly hot. The only place that we can find on the school site that is really cool is the woods. Can I trust you? And they said, yes, of course you can trust us, Mrs. Peacock. And then that led to the children wanting to build camps and dens.
Yes.
And then through the groups we needed to negotiate, well, how can we make this fair? And are there safety issues? So the children themselves came up with a code of how they could work in that area and in that space.
Right.
And that culminated this term, in the second half of the term, in every class having a week when they could use the space, and they've used the field and so on to build these dens.
How do you get the balance right between fun and serious time in school?
It's interesting, I was talking to some Year 6s just last week actually. So the children were telling me that they actually learn how to make the right decisions. They learn how to challenge themselves. They learn to cooperate with other individuals, whether it's sharing a maths task or whether it's within sport or on the playground or doing something, you know, like we've been saying on the field. All of those skills actually are life skills, which are to do
Yes.
with developing that resilience that allows you to understand that it's okay to make mistakes.
Yes,
And that you
good.
learn from mistakes, and that we all experience conflict at different times.
Yes.
But the issue is not to pretend that conflict doesn't happen, but to deal with it effectively when it arises and to have strategies.
Some sceptical adults might say, well, this is a recipe for mayhem. If children have so many choices,
Yes.
surely it's much better for them to have a narrow range of choices.
Well, I came to this school 4 years ago, and when I arrived at this school it was in special measures, and Ofsted had described the children as unteachable. We're now an outstanding school, and we have very high standards of learning, and the children themselves, if you ask them, will say that they don't need to misbehave because there's no reason to. They're treated with respect. Everybody is engaged in the whole business of being part of Wroxham. It's something that we all do together.
So you've transformed the school through outstanding leadership and with the support of your staff. The children are being brought up in an environment where they are respected. They'll be moving on to secondary school. What's going to happen to them then? Are we creating unreal expectations as a normal life for them? And will it be confounded when they get to secondary school?
What the children understand is that they are building a resilience and understanding that there is another way.
Mm-hmm.
And you won't always have an opportunity as a young person to be able to speak out and have your views heard. But if you have experienced a culture where that works effectively, hopefully you've understood that democracy can work, and you've understood that there are ways of having your voice heard which don't have to be ones which are the ones where you resort to anger and storming around because no one's listened. We're also working with all our local secondary schools. We have a shared conference in November.
And are they picking up your philosophies and
Well, it's not about our philosophy, it's about everybody learning together and seeing what the issues are for young people. And I think, I've worked in a secondary school myself as a teacher, and the pressures are very different in a secondary environment, although I would say that the values should be the same.
This approach doesn't prevent you from reaching your targets?
We've gone from E-star to A-star in terms of our attainment. Our SATs results are excellent.
Right, okay.
We had 97% level 4s and above this year.
Very good.
And so that's great, because it means I could carry on doing what I'm doing. And I do think there is a real issue for schools. If the standards are high, then there is a sense, well, okay, they might be a little bit wacky, but they're getting the results, so it's fine. And I think what's difficult for schools is those schools where the standards aren't as high as they might be, the pressure that schools are placed under by external people such as advisors and Ofsted and so on is to say, close down, don't be so creative because it's too much of a risk. And in fact the opposite is what happened here. We went with a risk-taking approach and we achieved more and more success on the back of that.
Judy Seba, Professor of Education at Sussex University, has been studying Wroxham School as part of her research on personalisation. Judy, why is it important to do hard-nosed, serious academic research in schools on these kinds of programmes?
I think there are a number of reasons. The main two are probably that we are investing public money in schools, and we need to know whether we're spending it wisely and whether we are in fact getting the results we think we're getting. There's an awful lot of hearsay in education about what is happening, what isn't happening, and we need to test that out regularly. The other side is that really teachers themselves want to know. They want to know whether what they're doing is the best thing they could be doing.
Can this approach be rolled out into schools with problems, transient children, many ethnic, language backgrounds?
I think it's been particularly appealing to the schools who are most challenged because it has provided a real means of changing the culture and a culture in which children who perhaps would otherwise be very disaffected have engaged and have felt that even if their behaviour or their way of functioning is sometimes rather different, that isn't a problem. That diversity can be accommodated and even valued.
Are there any children who can't do well with personalised learning? Are there some children who really need structure in their lives and not so much choice?
I think the interesting thing about the personalised learning, one of the interesting things, is that it's provided an opportunity for children to create that structure more themselves. And I suppose that what we would be looking for would be an undertaking of responsibility by the pupils, understanding that they do need that structure. I wouldn't have said that the schools who are pursuing personalised learning to maximum effect are necessarily less structured.
Are children brought up in this nurturing environment can be betrayed when they move into secondary schools?
Hopefully they will become the catalyst for change. Whether they feel betrayed or challenged or surprised, I think we'll be able to see that in the future. For
that to work, we have to have staff in secondary schools who are prepared to listen and to be challenged and not to be affronted by this.
There is still an established part of the profession who were trained to teach on their own without other adults in the room behind closed doors. People call it the second most private profession. You've probably heard that phrase before, and it's really very difficult for them to adapt to a more pupil-led curriculum and teaching. However, I think teachers who are being trained at the moment will be much better prepared for this.
So what's your message to teachers and head teachers watching this programme about this approach?
I think that they could find much in the schools that are adopting a personalised learning approach that they would get excited about. I think that the teachers that we work with in these schools are excited by this. They find it empowering in the sense, or invigorating in the sense of being less constrained. But that shouldn't, I think, communicate like a structure. I think that's really about getting back to some of the basic values, not necessarily the curriculum we had before, but the values dear to teachers' hearts in terms of making sure that we are developing young people who have the capacity to learn and to continue learning throughout their lives. And these schools really seem to be demonstrating that.
Resiliency programmes are also high on the agenda of King's Langley Secondary School in Hertfordshire, whose head teacher is Gary Lewis.
The transition is huge from primary to secondary school, and we need to get as many partners involved in helping that transition as possible. Right, good morning everyone, and can I thank you for welcoming me here this morning. I'm not quite sure who's more nervous, you or me. It's actually quite nerve-wracking for me to be at a primary school such as this. I visited Abbots Langley Primary School this morning as a sequence of visits that I do to primary schools at this time of the year. And my position is such that as head teacher of a large secondary school, I suppose I possibly have a little bit of a fearsome reputation. And a lot of youngsters are quite sort of almost, frightened of the fact that Mr. Lewis from the big school is about. So what I've done is trying to use the visits to the primary schools to do an assembly which is showing perhaps the warmer, softer side of me, and to engage with the youngsters, both not just the Year 6 students about to move upwards, but also the younger ones, so they just become slightly more relaxed about the whole concept of moving on. When we relaunched this school 5 years ago from a struggling base, it was a school in an underachieving Ofsted category, I was quite clear that the relaunch was going to be about the ethos and the focus on happy children and the complete individual. And our examination performance, although it's progressed over the last 5 years, not as significantly as one might necessarily expect, but we are now 4 times oversubscribed from a position where we couldn't fill up half of the places 5 years ago. We're quite excited about a new project that we're involved from September onwards. It's called the Resilience Project. It's an American-based project. And in its simplest form, it's really saying that youngsters need to be taught assertive behaviour. They need to be taught how to deal with stressful situations. So again, not removing the stress, but dealing with it as it crops up. And 3 of my teaching colleagues are going across to Philadelphia this summer, and they're going to spend 2 weeks in the States studying this programme.
The Penn Resiliency Programme is a school-based intervention curriculum designed to build resilience, promote adaptive coping skills and to teach effective problem solving. The idea really is to try and promote the idea of optimistic thinking amongst children. Many of our children growing up in the media age that is today, the Big Brother age, seem to believe that the idea of being successful in life is to be stick thin, is the idea of wearing the right pair of trainers or having their hair in a certain style, which is the whole idea of the course, that they've got to be happy with what they are, what they're capable of and what they're going to achieve. I hope that it will make an impact not just for the next 3 or 4 years, but for the next generation of children in Hertfordshire, and then hopefully, if that is the case, it can be pushed across the whole country.
Stress really matters to children and young people. We've seen here 2 outstanding examples of how in an appropriate environment students can be given the toolkits to have better emotional resilience and to be able to cope with the stresses in their lives.